Hello, this is AAT Section 7.4, Understanding Angles, and we're going to extend our understanding of measuring angles to measure angles that are greater than 180 degrees and angles that depend on the direction in which you measure them. So here we have an acute angle. Remember, we have a vertex and made up of two sides for that angle. We are going to add in, if we put an angle on a coordinate plane, so the vertex is at the origin, and the initial side, what's called the initial side, is on the positive x-axis. When we measure that angle, let's say our terminal side is right here. This angle, let's assume this angle here is 45 degrees. There's other ways to measure that angle. When we put an angle in standard position, if we go in this counterclockwise direction, it's going to be a positive angle. But if instead we measure it in a clockwise direction, going this way, it's going to be a negative angle. So we know there's 360 degrees in a circle. So this angle must, to make up that 360 degrees, would be that 45 minus 360. So this would be a negative angle, 315 degrees. 360 minus 45. So if we go in this clockwise direction, we're going to call it a negative angle. And if we go in this counterclockwise direction, we're going to measure it as a positive angle. So here our direction does matter. Remember our quadrants. We have the first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant going in counterclockwise direction, and that corresponds to the way in which you measure the angles. So sometimes we'll look at where our terminal side lands and talk about which quadrant that terminal side is in. So here we're trying to draw each of the angles on the axes below and name the quadrant in which it terminates. So 350 degrees, so remember straight up here, this will be 90 degrees. Here we're at 180 degrees. 270 degrees, adding 90 all the way around, and here 360 degrees. So if we're trying to draw an angle that's 315 degrees, we're going to start with that initial side. I know it's going to be more than 270, so it's going to go all the way around into this fourth quadrant, and there's the terminal side. And I actually know that I have 45 degrees left to make it all the way to that 360, but this is my positive 315 degrees because it's measured in a counterclockwise direction. So when you draw it, draw those two sides and show this arrow so you can see which direction it is. So 210 degrees, here's my initial side. 210 degrees, I know it's going to be more than 180, but less than 270. So 210 degrees will be 20 degrees past 180, so somewhere in there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a good. And we end our arrow like this, so we know we're measuring in this direction, 210 degrees. That ends in quadrant 3. It asked us which quadrant it is in. This one is in quadrant 4. Make sure your quadrants are always named as Roman numerals. Quadrants are traditionally named that way. Now 460 degrees. Well, if 360 is a whole circle, 460 is more than a whole circle. So it's 100 degrees beyond a full circle. So we're going to kind of spiral this. So here's our initial side. We're going to go around. That's 360 degrees. And we need to go 100 more degrees. Well, so there I'm up at 90 degrees more, and I need a little more, like 10 degrees, and that's where my angle is going to end. So around 360 degrees plus another 100 degrees, that's a 460 degree angle, and it terminates in the second quadrant. All right, so that's how that works. And here it says name each of the angles drawn on the axes below. And so I want to talk about how there's more than one way to name these angles. So let's look first we are told that this is 110 degrees, but we wouldn't call this 110 degrees because the direction is going, depending on which direction we're measuring it. So if we measure going in this opposite direction, meaning a clockwise direction, we would call this negative 110 degrees. However, if we measure it this way, in this direction, it's going to be 180 plus how much? So let's think about that. If the whole circle is 360 degrees, if we subtract out 110, we're going to be left with 250 degrees. So this angle here, this, I'm going to make it blue, is going to be 250 degrees. Now there's an infinite amount of angles we can name that still terminate at that same place. Like I could lap around 360 degrees and then go another 250 degrees. So let's think about that just a second. So if we have an angle down here, again, here's our angle that we had drawn. So if it goes, let me get another color. If it goes all the way around, that's 360 plus another 250 degrees, 360 plus 250 would be what? 610 degree angle. That would be called also. And we could go around and around and around, keep adding 360 as many times as we want to, and all those angles would terminate at the same third quadrant terminal side. Okay, so this one, 45 degrees angle. So it's hard to see, but my actual angle, here's the initial side, and here's the terminal side. And so for that angle, it tells us that's 45 degrees, but this isn't a 45 degree angle. Right here, it would be, well, if it's 180 all the way, 180 minus 45 would be 135 degrees for the positive version. Or if we measure backwards, well, that's 180 degrees plus 45, 180 plus 45 would be 225 degrees for this going backwards, but since it's measuring in that clockwise direction, we call that the negative angle, negative 225. And again, we could keep adding 360 or subtracting 360 and get an infinite amount of names for that angle. So this last one here, here's our initial side and our terminal side. So this angle I know is 90 degrees, and so if I'm measuring this way, I'm just going to do 90 minus that 18 degrees, which is 72, but it's negative 72 because I'm measuring it at that opposite clockwise direction, where this one would be 270 degrees plus 18 more, so that is 288 degrees for that blue angle. Again, we could add 360 as many times as we want to get an infinite amount of names for that angle. Okay, flip on over. We're looking at coterminal angles. So coterminal angles is really what we were just doing. Are angles in standard position, meaning it has an initial side and a terminal side, that have the same terminal side. So different names for the same angle. So if I look at this angle right here, I could, if let's just say this measure right here is 135 degrees, we'd call it 135 degrees, but it would also be called, just like we just looked at, 135 from 360, which would be 225 degrees. So that's very similar to the one we just did. But if I wanted more names for that angle, if I took that 225 and I added a 360, I'd get 585 degrees. Is also going all the way around 360 and then back around to that. And so I could keep adding 360 again and again and again, or I could subtract 360 again and again and again and get an infinite amount of angles that are coterminal. Co means share terminal share the terminal side. So coterminal angles will be multiples of 360. You're going to add and subtract 360 as many times as you want, as needed, depending on how many coterminal angles you want. So if, for instance, this angle is 135 degrees, let's do it the positive direction. So this one would be negative 225 degrees. So I could take either one and keep subtracting 360 over and over again and get all those angles that were ending in that same place. And this one, let's say this one's 60 degrees. So 60 degrees is coterminal to, let's add 360. If I add 360, I get 420. So 60 is coterminal to 420. So 420 would be going all the way around and back to there is 420. I could add 360 again, so 420 plus another 360 would be 780. So 420, 60, and 780 are all coterminal angles. 780 would be going around twice and then ending there. I could subtract 360 over and over again. 60 degrees, my original angle, minus 360 would give me negative 300. That's coterminal. So if I add or subtract 360 as many times as I need to, I'll get all these angles that will end at the same place. So here we're talking about reference angles. Reference angles, the positive, acute, meaning less than 90 degrees, angle between the terminal side of the angle in standard position and the x-axis, basically how far the angle is from the x-axis. So if we look at this angle here, I'm going to draw all these so we can see where the angle was. The initial side and the terminal side. So this angle is 50 degrees. Well, the reference angle would be 50 degrees because it's supposed to be the positive acute angle. It's positive, it's acute. The distance between the terminal side and the x-axis, so that's 50 degrees. This angle, on the other hand, 130 is the whole angle. It's an obtuse angle, but this is the part that's the reference angle. It's the distance between the terminal side and the x-axis. It's also 50 degrees, positive and acute. So your reference angle is always, I did 180 minus 130 because this right here would be 180 degrees. This reference angle, again, make sure it's the angle made to the x-axis, not to the y-axis. It's not this angle. So if this whole thing's 230, if I do 230 minus 180, this reference angle is also 50 degrees. And the one in the fourth quadrant, this would be the reference angle. So the reference angle, again, always made with the x-axis, 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 acute positive angle. So if it's 310 all the way, this would also be 50 degrees. 360 minus 310 would leave me 50 degrees there. So example 3 here, we're trying to find all the coterminal angles between negative 360 and 360 degrees and find the reference angle. So the reference angle, again, is the angle made with the x-axis that's acute and positive. Let me draw out my angles so you can see them. So if this is negative 145, how much more do we need to get the reference angle? So the reference angle would be, if I do 180 minus 45 degrees, I'd be left with this space right here. So that would be 35. Make sure it's positive. 180 minus that 145. So that's the reference angle. And then I need coterminal angles. So coterminal angles, if I take the original angle, negative 145, and I add 360, or subtract 360 as many times as I want to. So if I add 360, I'm going to get positive 215 degrees. So that's a coterminal angle. If I do negative 145 minus 360, I'm going to get negative 505 degrees. So that's a coterminal angle. And I could keep subtracting 360 or keep adding 360. Now, I only wanted ones between 360 and negative 360. So this is really the only answer I needed. So my answer's reference angle is 35 degrees, coterminal angle 215 degrees. Okay, here I have a 390 degree angle going all the way around 360 degrees and a little bit more. How much more is that? That's 30 degrees. That is my reference angle, the acute positive angle made with the x-axis. Now I need to find coterminal angles. Make sure in your notes and as you're doing your work, you tell me which, this is coterminal, these are coterminal, and which one's the reference angle so we can tell. So coterminal angles would be taking the original angle, 390, and adding and subtracting 360 as many times as we wanted to. So I'm going to do 390 minus 360, which is, of course, 30 degrees. So that's a coterminal angle. And then I could add 360 again. I could continue subtracting 360. So if I do 30 degrees minus another 360, I'd get negative 330 degrees. So that's a coterminal angle. And I could keep going, keep adding or subtracting 360. However, those are the only two I'm going to get between negative 360 and 360. Okay, number C, letter C. This angle is 225 degrees, so the reference angle would be the angle made with the x-axis. So think just a second, if this is 225, what would that angle be? So since this is 180 right here, let me use a new color. If I do 225 minus 180, my reference angle would be 45 degrees. So that's 45. And then if I take the original angle, so now I'm finding coterminal, and 225, and I'm going to add 360. And I can see that's going to be more than 360 degrees. That's 585. That's coterminal, but it is greater than 360. So I'm going to try to subtract 360, which of course I'm going to subtract this way and make it negative. So it's going to be negative 360, 135, negative 135. So this is going to be the one that works, a coterminal angle of 135, reference angle of 45. All right, last three down here. So here, finding the reference angle and finding the coterminal angles. This one isn't drawn for us, but we can think the reference angle, if it's an acute angle already, the reference angle is just going to be 47. For the coterminal, I'm going to add and subtract 360 degrees. If I add 360 degrees, I get 407 degrees, which is, of course, more than 360. But if I subtract 360, I get negative 313 degrees. So that's my coterminal angle. They're both coterminal, but this is the only one that's between 360 and negative 360. So negative 222. So it might help you to think of where that is. Negative 222 is going backwards 180 degrees and a little more. So my reference angle is the acute angle, positive angle made with the x-axis. So if this is 180 degrees, how much further have I gone past? Well, 180 degrees plus what? 42 degrees would be my reference angle. Make sure it's positive, even though I was going in a negative direction. So my coterminal angles, I'm going to take negative 222 and add and subtract 360 degrees as many times as I want to. And I think I'd get 138 degrees if I add. And if I subtract, I get negative 582 degrees, which of course is outside the range I was asked for. So there's my answer, 138. 645, last one. Okay, one time around the circle is 360, plus 90 more would be 450, plus 90 more would be 540, plus 90 more, 540 plus 90 would be 610. All the way around 2 times would be 720, so my 645 is somewhere in here. I've gone around twice, and then back almost to the 720 degrees. So my reference angle is the distance between 610 and 720, and that would be 30 degrees. So reference of 30 degrees, and my coterminal angles would be adding, subtracting to the original angle, 645. I can see if I add 645 to 360, it's going to be too big. So I'm going to subtract 360. If I subtract 360 one time, 2 times, let's see. Let's do it here together. 645 minus 360 is 285. So that works as my first one. And then notice I took that 285 and if you can see that, if I subtracted 360 again and I got negative 75, and that's still in that range. So those are both, so I did 285 minus another 360, and I got negative 75. So those are both in the range. All right, go practice.